Thank you very much, guys. Nice tune. Hey, do you guys know that this was all for love? Yeah. The reason we're here is all for love. Yeah. The Bible tells us that actually God is love. So it's not just that he has love or he has loving feelings, but that he is love, that he epitomizes what it is. He's the source, he's the beginning, he's the end of it. And actually this was all for love. And you know, sometimes we've just got to come back to a place where we remember why we are even here. Not just here gathered, but why we are even here on earth. And you know, for some of you may have never heard that before, that there is a reason beyond just the fact that your parents gave birth to you and you ended up here. But actually, I believe, and we believe as a church community, that actually God placed you here for a reason. It was because of love. That actually he sent his son Jesus to live as a man on earth and to suffer a difficult life, to say the least. But then to die, to take away and pay the price and the punishment for everything that we had done and everything that we were to do. And it was all for love. And sometimes we've heard it so many times that we forget. And it becomes about an event or a program or our job or our family. You know, ultimately, it's about him. It's about Jesus Christ and his freedom and the fact that we can have entrance and invitation into his freedom today. And so it's good news. And so it's called the good news, actually, but it is good news. And so if you don't know that today, can I tell you that we want to give you an opportunity to be a part of that later on. But please, I would ask you to soften your hearts, be ready for what God's got to say. And remember, this is about love. We're not filling time on a Sunday morning. I'm sure we've all got better things we can be doing if it's not about this. For me, if it's not about this, I've finished anyway. I've had enough. Anyway, brilliant. Hey, we've been speaking the last few weeks about making some things real. We've said that we want to frame the year with an understanding and expectation of making some things real. Some things that we've heard are that this is about God making us real as a starter. So not just us making things real or not just us seeing things come to pass, but in that process and in that metamorphosis that God would do something in and through us that would change us and make us real. Yeah. When I say that, I don't mean negative and critical, because very often when people say, I'm just going to be real, they say something really negative and critical. But what I mean is authentic, true to who he's called us to be, free to be who we are, free with our quirks and our idiosyncrasies to be who we are as Christ calls us. So we've talked about that. We've talked about the fact that making things real is not just about us, and neither is it just about God, but it's about a divine partnership of God doing everything he can do as we do everything we do. And there's a partnership, there's a coming together of us making some things real and God making those things real that we can't make real because it's out of our control. The third thing we talked about is Ben last week gave us some tools to how to actually make that practically a reality. And today I want to talk about something kind of in the thread of making it real, but it's a bit of the space in between deciding that you want to make something real and actually it being real. Because who knows that in between those 2 points, there's a lot of life, there's a lot of space, and there's a lot of things that go on. Life goes on, doesn't it? So for you guys this morning, you may have come to a point, or you may not have yet come to a point, where you've decided that there's something you want to make real. I don't know, maybe it's something personal, maybe it's to do with your family or a career, or maybe it's for somebody else or for a collective group of people. I don't know what that is. But in between the point of you deciding to make that thing real and it actually becoming a living, breathing flesh reality, there's a lot of space and time in between that, which we call life. IKEA calls it the wonderful everyday. Have you seen IKEA's campaign lately? The wonderful everyday. And the person who instigated the campaign decided to call it the wonderful everyday because they said this: we plan, we save, we spend our whole year talking about our 2-week holiday in summer or our 2-week skiing holiday in winter, but actually we spend the rest of our lives every day living in our homes and building up to those big events. And his theory is that actually, okay, he's trying to sell a product, just in case any of you hadn't guessed, but if we appreciate our everyday living spaces, the wonderful everyday, that actually we should be putting more attention into what happens every day and not just those big monumental events and not just those big breakthroughs. And so they've based their campaign on the wonderful everyday. And now we know that every day is not always wonderful, that actually it is real life. So some days we have struggles and challenges. But his concept and his understanding is that we would start to see things differently and maybe become awake and aware to some things that happen during our everyday lives. You know, if we can be prepared for that space in between, saying we want to make something real, and then it actually being real, we can be alert and aware to make it from point A to point B. Because halfway through there, and probably closer than halfway through there, we fall at hurdles because we come against opposition, we come up against tiredness, we come up against hard work, we come up against situations that then stop us from seeing something being made real. And I just reckon, as a community, as a family, if we can understand and maybe acknowledge what some of those things are before we set out on the journey or early in our journey, then it helps us and gives us strength to keep going and realize this is normal. Some of this stuff is normal. There are going to be some things that we can expect to happen that when we do, we can be prepared, and with God's help, he can equip us. Now, not everyone in here would call themselves a follower of Christ. That's fine. These things are principles, they're life principles that happen all the time. But you know, my hope and my desire would be that you understand that we're not just talking about being self-made people this morning, or even a self-made community, that our humility rests on the fact that God, we say, is our King and our Lord. And actually, if we don't have him and we don't know who he is, we may as well stop now. We may as well quit. So I'm building that you understand. So if we look at the story of anybody who has successfully achieved a dream or successfully had an idea at a point of inception and moved it to become a reality, you'll realize that there's probably some patterns along the way that they've encountered, some things they've come up against. Many people, not just biblical figures, but secular figures, probably in your own life, you would acknowledge some of that. But what I want to do today is look at the life of Nehemiah and actually look at his space in between and what happened. Nehemiah is a character in the Old Testament. He was living in a foreign land at the time that he decided to make something real. So he was a Jew by birth. He'd lived in Jerusalem. That was his hometown, his home city. And at the time, he was living and working in Persia or Iran. And he would have been living and working there. And so he was getting on about his daily business. And some friends and family came to see him, spend a bit of time with him. And, you know, as you do when your friends and family come and visit, if you're living in another country or if you live in a different part of the country, you would ask them, like, how's things back in the city? How's things back in Jerusalem? And they said, well, you know what? They're not so good. Nehemiah would have known that things weren't great, but he said they're not so good. And the walls of the city have been burned down and the gates have been knocked down. They've been burned down. So basically, the protection of the city, everything that kept it together, everything that gave it an identity and a heritage had been burned down. And so imagine you've been away from home. You hear this about Wigan. Imagine Wigan's your hometown. And somebody says they burned Hay Hall down. They've knocked down the pier. Everything's changed. There's been a distraction. There's been a disruption among the people that has changed your town. You know, when things happen in a place, it changes people. You've only got to look at the situation of 9/11 to see how much that can impact and change, not just a city, but actually it could create a global change in people. So he was deeply saddened at this news. Nehemiah was deeply saddened. He was moved. And the Bible tells us that he went for 3 or 4 days away to pray. He was sad. He was downcast. And he started to speak to God and say, God, you know what? It's not fair. These walls have been knocked down. It's disgraced my family. It's disgraced these people. And you said that if we stick with you, we can come back to you, that you won't leave us. And so he started to pray and ask God. And he was just deeply sad. At the time, he was working as a cupbearer for the king of Persia, and he would go in, I guess, take this king his wine, his whatever he had to drink. And the king said to him, Nehemiah, why are you so sad? And he obviously wasn't sad in his presence often, so he said, how can I be happy when basically the destruction that's going on is going on in my city? How can I be happy for my family, for my hometown, for my people? How can I be but anything but sad? And the king said, surely this is not just a sadness, but it's a sadness of the heart. He said, you're not sick, so it must be a sadness of the heart. And at this, he released Nehemiah because Nehemiah, at that point where he'd been praying and speaking to God, had been given a burden and a desire to go back to his hometown and rebuild the city walls. And so that was his make it real thing. He was there, he decided, I've got to go back and make some of this real. I've got to go back to my hometown, I've got to rally the troops, and we've got to change something. And probably little did he know what was ahead of him. And so we can pick up the story at Nehemiah 4. So at this point, he'd gone back to Jerusalem to rebuild the city walls. There would have been officials involved, different people who would have known about this situation. And it mentions some of those names here in this part of the story. It'll come up on the screen. So Nehemiah chapter 4 and verses 1-3 say this. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, so it's Nehemiah speaking the story, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, he said, "What are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices?" He was insulting them. He was winding them up. "Will they finish in a day?" Obvious question. "Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble burned as they are?" And Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, "What they are building, even a fox climbing up on it, would break down their wall of stones." One of the first things we can be aware of when going on the journey from making something real, so the point of theory or faith or something that's not yet real yet, moving over to something that is real, is opposition. The first thing that Nehemiah came up against was an opposition. And it came in the form of these government officials who, for probably their own reasons and whatever reasons they were, didn't want Nehemiah to rebuild this wall. He didn't want them to establish the gates back and rebuild the wall. So they stood and insulted them. They made fun of them. They took the mick of them. They basically probably did anything they could to stand against what was happening. And in your journey of perhaps what God's given you to make real, a promise, or perhaps it's something that you've stepped out to make real. It doesn't just have to be a promise. It can be something that you've decided on. There will be opposition that comes against you. There will be people who don't like the thing that you want to make real. For whatever reason, maybe they could be jealous. They could just misunderstand you. They could misunderstand your story. Or, the other thing is that because we're human beings, sometimes when somebody else is doing something good, it makes us jealous and makes us look at our own life and brings a sobering reality that actually we're not really doing anything, so I'm going to make fun of that person. We've all done it. That's just who we are as humans. But, if we can be aware that there is going to be, if we're trying to do something good and build something good for God's kingdom or to bring freedom to people, we can be assured that there's going to be some kind of opposition and something that will come up against us. And so moving on, the next part of the story, which is just a bit further on from where we've just read, Nehemiah 4, in verses 10-14, they're at work, the walls are being built, everything's moving forward, the opposition's going on. And you know what I love at this point, that it doesn't tell us that in opposition that Nehemiah retaliated and he threw a load of stuff back. If we look in Proverbs, the Bible teaches us that a soft answer or a softness, it turns away anger. Sometimes we'll come up against opposition, and our thing is not to sit and whinge to all our friends about XYZ who's opposing me and who's making my life difficult or who's making this situation difficult. But actually what he did was continued with the work. He didn't stop to turn around and say, because you're opposing me, I'm now going to have a go at you. Or because you're opposing me, I'm going to make your life difficult, or I'm going to bring a revenge onto you. No, what he did was turn back, and this is how I imagine it in my head, is that he looked, turned back, picked up his trowel and carried on. Probably didn't even have a trowel, but in my mind, he picked up his trowel and he carried on. Because the softness, it turns away anger. And it speaks something bigger of us and more so of God if we can, in the face of opposition, in the face of challenge, say, okay, that hurt, but you know what? I'm going to carry on. Because rather than me being bitter and hurt, there's something bigger that needs to carry on. I need to carry on doing this work. I need to carry on making this real. I won't be distracted by it. And so Nehemiah 4, verse 10-14, the work's been going on. And it says, meanwhile, the people in Judah, so they were the people who were rebuilding the walls. And, they were not just, they were not all carpenters by trade or builders by trade. They had all different trades. Nehemiah's story actually tells us that some were perfume makers. There were all kinds of locksmiths. They were all different types of people who'd come together to center around this work. So meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. Also, our enemies said, before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them, and we will kill them and put an end to the work. Then the Jews who lived near them came over and told us 10 times, wherever you turn, they will attack us. Therefore, I stationed some of my people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and daughters, your wives and homes. The next thing that Nehemiah came up against, which we can expect in our own journeys, is hard work and tiredness, fatigue. These workers had been working their butts off to get this wall done. They were working hard, guessing that they'd left their own trades to come and center on this one bigger purpose and this one bigger job that needed to be doing. And what happened is that they were becoming tired, they would become weary, they were probably fed up, they were coming against the opposition, they had people speaking in their ears that they were going to be killed, they were going to be attacked, and they just felt tired. They just felt weary, they became tired of what they were doing. But what I love about what Nehemiah does is that he stands up, probably feeling very tired, very downcast and weary himself, and says, you know what, guys, this is why we're doing this. This is why we're building this wall. He reminded them and said, remember, Lord your God is with you. He's great and awesome. Do this for your families. Do this for your kingsmen. Do this for your people. And actually surely that is that same message that God brings to us, is actually in the thing that you're trying to make real. Why are you doing it? What I love about Nehemiah is his motivation was not about him. It was not just about his family. It was about rebuilding and re-glorifying God's name and rebuilding people to see something bigger again. It wasn't for his own gain. In fact, he paid a high price to go back and do that. But actually, it was for a rebuilding of something that God was trying to do. In your weariness and your tiredness, which will come from time to time, you've got to remember that there is a fight on. There's a fight on for you. There's a fight on for the thing that you're trying to make real. And actually, if we don't recognize that, the tiredness and weariness and our life situation and circumstance and our stage of life, whatever that is, will become an excuse, and it will become a pity party that we'll try and invite people to, but you probably won't come anyway because you're not my friend and I'm feeling sorry for myself kind of thing. We will try and invite people to, and if they're daft enough, they'll come along with us. Actually, that's what that turns into when we get tired, because tiredness affects us, doesn't it? Tiredness, weariness affects us. And if we're not equipped to think, do you know what, I'm tired. Yeah, I am tired. But I'm going to come back and center myself on the reason why. That's all Nehemiah did. He brought the people back and said, this is why. I know you're tired. I know they're saying they're going to kill us. I know we're in a dangerous position, but this is why. Basically, what he was saying is, it's worth the cost you're paying now to see your friends, your family, your people released into freedom. And can I tell you that if the thing you want to make real is not just for you, but it's for other people, can I tell you that it's more than worth the cost? See, some things can look like they're about us and they're a means to an end to set some other people free. But can I tell you, if you're make it real maybe is about your marriage, or it's about your kids or your career, let that be a gateway to bringing freedom to other people. Don't let it just stop with you and your family, but actually let's see the bigger picture as the church, as a church family, and as children of God, more importantly, to actually see that this is bigger than just us. Yeah. Nehemiah was saying, this is bigger than just us. We've got to carry on. I know you're tired, but this is bigger than us. I know your situation is this and that, but actually this is bigger than us. Look back at the wall. This is why we're doing it. Look back at the people who were there, the lost, the downcast. This is why. And so they came up against opposition, they came up against tiredness and hard work. And then in Nehemiah 6, verses 1 to 4, we come to a place where the work is coming to an end. So there's been some success, there's been some moving forward, which is great. And so perhaps the people were a little bit more encouraged, a little bit more lifted in themselves. And then Nehemiah writes this: when word came to Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall and not left a gap that was in it, so those people are the people who were standing up against him, who were trying to stop the work, though up to that time I had not set the gates, the doors in the gates, Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message: come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. But they were scheming to harm me. Yeah, the plain of Ono. You're a bit of a clue, like, don't go there. But they were scheming to harm me. So I sent my messengers to them with this reply: I am carrying on a great project and I cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it to come and go down to you? 4 times they sent me the same message, and each time I gave them the same answer. Distraction is one of the most subtle, I believe, workings of the enemy, one of the most subtle workings of our enemy, which we've got to believe if there's good, there's also a presence of bad. Actually, that distraction, our own distractions that come in our way in the form of people, in the form of task, in the form of season of life, whatever those distractions are, they can take us away from the work. They can take us away from the thing that we've committed to and said we're going to see made real. They can be a complete tear away from all that work that's been done. Because I love in the story that it tells us that actually the work was nearly complete. Nehemiah says the only thing I hadn't done is put the gates in the doorways. It's like the walls are up, the gates are the only thing that are not there. And you know, perhaps at this time, it was almost complete. And sometimes I think when we feel we're making headway, we can get distracted and think, no, it's fine, it's coming to pass. And then we take our eye off the goal, we take our eye off the why and off the purpose, and we get distracted right at the last hurdle. And that's what these people were trying to do to Nehemiah. They were trying to get him to come down. Yeah. And they were persistent. They didn't just try it once, they tried it 4 times. And in fact, the Bible says they tried it a 5th time, and it didn't work again. He wouldn't leave what he was trying to do because he knew it was too important. You know, when the distractions come, if we don't know what we are trying to make real, if we don't know why it is so important that God has put you in this place where you are now, in your workplace, in your home, wherever you are, in this town, in the towns around this region, if we don't recognize the importance of that, we will easily become distracted. There'll always be another excuse. There'll always be another thing we can and can't do, or we won't even notice and our eyes will get taken off the work. So as we close, you know, it's so interesting that we've talked about this morning and sang that song, Take Heart, because what I want to do is encourage you with the words of Jesus. Because actually what Jesus said in a conversation to his disciples was this: in this life, you will have many troubles. You know, I'm not trying to be negative this morning. We said God's trying to make us real. I'm just trying to be real. If you're trying to do something good for God, you will have opposition, it will be hard work, and you will be distracted. Those 3 things are pretty much dead cert guaranteed. And Jesus tells us himself, actually, that in this life, you will have troubles. You will have sadness. You will have brokenness, because we're incomplete. We don't live in a perfect world. We do live in a broken world, which is why God sent Jesus. And he said, you know, this brokenness will continue. But take heart. And he says this, why? Because I have overcome the world. Take heart because I have overcome the world. You know, I really choose to believe that when Jesus said that, what he was saying to his disciples is, I've done the hardest part. I've done my bit. Actually, I've made something real so that you are now free to go and make some stuff real. And guess what? I'm with you. Take heart. I've overcome the world. I'm bigger than this. So if you're with me and you're on my team, we can do it. You can push through the distraction. You can push through the hard work and the tiredness and the reality of sometimes how you don't feel so excited about the thing you're trying to make real. We know that's the case. And he said you can push through it because... And you can push through it, but you don't have to just push through it. You can take heart in it. You can say, do you know what, I'm going to take heart because I'm going to look back at what Jesus said and said, you know what, if he could make something real, him in me, we can make this real. And that's what he said. And so I want to leave you with this question. What are some questions that you need to answer for your space in between? What are some of the things that have got to be a negotiable? What are some of the things that have got to be a non-negotiable to help you work your way from the inception of making something real to actually seeing it being made real? Because questions, some questions we can know the answer to before they come up. Some things are a surprise. We don't know. Life throws a curveball. We don't know it's coming. Some things we can know the answer to before it comes up. And so what are the questions for you in your life, in your story, that you can answer now that will say, you know what, God, no matter what happens, if I'm committed to making this real, not just for me and my family, but for my workplace, for my neighbours, for my colleagues, for the people wherever you place me, that actually I have more of a chance of working through this. I have more of a chance of being aware, being prepared to see something that you want to see made real. This is not just about a positivity or human determination. If we try and do this on human determination, it won't work because things will become too difficult. There isn't a good enough reason for us to carry on. But if we have a deep longing to make some things real that will honor God and release people from captivity and release people from that brokenness and that will replace it with a beauty that can't be explained other than Jesus Christ himself, you know what? It's worth it. It's worth the cost. But only when we pay the cost for more than just ourselves, I believe, may I be bold enough to say, does it make it worth the cost? And so I'll leave you with that question. What questions do you need to answer now before you embark on this journey, or maybe at the beginning of this journey, that you can say, God, when that opposition comes, when that difficulty or that darkness comes, when the distraction comes, I'm going to be so fixed on what you've said. I'm going to be so consumed by you, but also the task that you've given me to do, that I'm not going to be distracted away, no matter who it is, no matter what it is, and no matter what they're saying.